Welcome to a parent workshop delivered by the South West London and St George's Mental Health Trust Trailblazer team. We are a team that works across colleges providing early intervention, one-to-one work and workshops, and training to staff, students and now parents about mental health, with the aim of making this a much easier subject to speak about and preventing young people reaching crisis points. Today's workshop is called It's Okay to Talk About Self-Harm. We've chosen these words deliberately as we want this to be the key message from today, and in recognition that this is a very difficult topic to discuss with our children. We may have many fears about talking about it with them. As in light of it is such a difficult subject, first of all, let's just think about taking care of ourselves. This workshop might be challenging to engage with, especially if you have experience or are affected by the content. It also involves talking about difficult issues. So just to preempt that some of this might be hard, we're just going to suggest ways of looking after yourself whilst you're participating. But these are also things to practice if you are supporting a distressed child. Take part with someone else. Listen to this together if you can. Listening with somebody else could be really helpful and supportive. If talking about this is distressing, try talking to someone you trust, or you could contact one of the organisations listed in the next slide. Breathing. Breathing is really important in calming ourselves down when we're feeling distressed. Always breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth when you're trying to calm down your anxious part of your brain or if you're distressed. One technique is to imagine breathing as you're drawing a square. So with your finger, you draw up the side of the square as you breathe in through your nose. And then you breathe out as you draw the top of the square. And then you breathe in as you draw the side of the square. Then you breathe out as you draw the line below. That's called square breathing. Grounding. Grounding is a way of making ourselves very present in the here and now. Quite often when we're anxious, we're really galloping off into the past and worries and what if questions. And when we're feeling low, we're often going backwards thinking, I wish I could have done this, I should have done this differently. Both of those situations create anxiety and distress, and we're not able to change them or answer any of those questions. So grounding is a way of really making ourselves present in the here and now. Feel the seat beneath you, feel the floor where your feet are. Really notice everything around you and try and use all 5 of your senses. So look at 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can touch, 1 thing you can taste. And using all those senses calms down our anxious or distressed brain and makes us very present in the here and now. The other thing is step away. If this is difficult to listen to, know your limits. Come back to it when you're ready. And these are things you can use with your child as well when they're experiencing distress. Here are the numbers. This slide will be put up at the end. They're all very useful organisations with lots of information on their websites. So here we're going to move on to what is self-harm. NICE defines self-harm as self-injury or self-poisoning, irrespective of the apparent purpose of the act. People often self-harm as a way to manage very difficult feelings and emotions. Over time, this can become less effective or lead to more difficult emotions. But here's some examples of what we mean by self-harm. So some of them we're pretty aware of, and things like cutting are the most common way of harming yourselves, but there's also biting yourself, pinching yourself, scratching your skin, burning your skin, hitting yourself or hitting walls, misusing drugs or prescription drugs and alcohol, hair pulling, but also things that might not be quite so obvious, such as engaging in risky sexual acts, putting yourself in harm's way, deliberately having fights, knowing you're going to be hurt, but also things like binge eating, starvation. So lots of things can be ways of managing very difficult feelings. Just going to look at some of the common misconceptions about self-harm. The myth. Self-harm is attention seeking. I'm sure we've heard that. The truth is self-harm is attention needing. Somebody is in need of attention, but the phrase attention seeking can have a lot of stigma and can stop people talking. We can often be frightened that talking about self-harm will put the idea in someone's head, but the truth is that research suggests talking can be really helpful. Silence and stigma can stop people accessing support, and self-harm is something that's often done in private. People are needing support, but despite this, self-harm can still be very secretive. I need to know the answer or be able to fix it. The truth is, knowing that you're ready to listen may be the hope that the person first needs. So why? While many people don't say self-harm to kill themselves with an intention to die, a history of self-harm is the best predictor of dying by suicide. Self-harm can bring a sense of relief in the short term, but it could the cause of the distress has not gone away. And then it can bring up even more difficult emotions and make your child feel worse. But also intent changes over time, from one episode to another, so all self-harm needs to be taken seriously. Who does self-harm affect? It doesn't discriminate. Anyone can be affected. While self-harm is more commonly reported by young people in their mid-teenage years, and stats are showing that 1 in 4 teenage girls and 1 in 7 teenage boys have used this, it's actually the suicide is the leading cause of death for men under 50, and all people of all ages and backgrounds, no typical person. Everybody is individual and their journey is unique, but also their road to recovery. So why do people self-harm? It's important to remember that self-harm is different for every person. The best way to understand the whats and whys for someone is to actually ask them. Self-harm thoughts and behaviours are usually the result of complex combination of biological, situational, social and psychological factors. They may arise in response to a specific or a major life event, i.e. relationship breakdown, or it could be an accumulation of smaller things. Talking and getting help can break the cycle of self-harm, but people can find it hard to trust and talk about their feelings. The reasons behind self-harm often change, so it's always better to ask rather than assume. So yes, research shows that overwhelming emotional issues can affect people at any stage of life, and they're a major factor behind self-harm. Using it as a means to sort of release some of the built-up tensions and frustrations. For people who actively self-harm, there will often be mental health problems such as stress, anxiety or depression, which reach sort of intolerable levels. These issues may have lasted for some time before a person self-harms. But here's some of the ways young people have said and have described why they use self-harm. Some have said that it helps them to express something that's really hard for them to put into words. It turns invisible thoughts or feelings into something visible. It can change emotional pain into physical pain, reduce overwhelming emotional feelings or thoughts, have a sense of being in control, escape traumatic memories, have something in life that they can rely on. It could be a form of punishing themselves for their feelings and experiences. Could be something that they've said it stops them from feeling numb, disconnected, or dissociated. It creates a reason to physically care for themselves. It's also a way of expressing suicidal feelings and thoughts without actually taking their own life. So that's what young people have said. Sometimes a child or young person won't know why they self-harm, and that's okay. Self-harm can feel like a way to cope with difficult feelings and release attention. And the physical pain of hurting themselves can feel like a distraction from the emotional pain that they're struggling with. Essentially, there are no fixed rules about why people self-harm. And it's really important, even if your child doesn't know why, that they know that they're not alone in this and they can still get help. So this is some of the things young people have said. They have said, my body comes with a trigger warning. I didn't know how else to cope. Didn't like myself. I started when I was 15. I can't remember why, but that's just what I did. Self-harm proved to me I was real, and at times it also silenced the chaos in my head, caused the flashbacks. So let's just move on to the signs and symptoms of self-harm. So the physical ones, cuts, bruises, burns that can't be explained, blood stains on clothing or tissues in their room, blood, wearing coats, long sleeve clothing, particularly when it seems inappropriate if it's really warm, withdrawing and not speaking to others. It can be hard to recognize some of the signs of self-harm. But it's important that you also trust your instincts if you're worried about something. So yeah, physical symptoms can often be a little bit more apparent than some of the other ones. Let's look at the emotional symptoms. Signs of low self-esteem, statements about not being good enough, general feelings of self-loathing and expressing a wish to punish themselves, low mood, lack of interest, motivation, talk of not wanting to carry on, suicidal thoughts. But also some of the less obvious things are outbursts of anger or risky behaviour like drinking, drugs, or engaging in risky sexual behaviours. All things to sort of think about what's going on. So here are some of the common factors associated with self-harm. Someone may be experiencing many of these factors and not self-harm. That's important to say. And equally, someone might self-harm for lots of other reasons. But here's some of the factors that are commonly associated. Feeling trapped, lack of control over their lives, experiencing trauma, racism, homophobia, transphobia, feeling overwhelmed, feeling isolated, anxiety, acting impulsively, feeling a lack of belonging, low self-esteem, difficulties with substance misuse. And then some of the other things, experiencing adversity, being bullied, school, college, pressure, relationship difficulties, anger, knowing other people who self-harm, feeling hopeless. And of course, we have to acknowledge the impact of the pandemic on many of these things. So rates of self-harm have increased over the past decade, and in the UK are amongst the highest in Europe. 25,000 11 to 25-year-olds are admitted to hospital each year after an incident of self-harm. And whilst research is still coming out on the impact of the pandemic, if we look at all those commonest factors associated with self-harm, it would seem obvious that the rates will have gone up. So here is a pathway of an incident to self-harm. So we have sort of two different pathways here. The first one is somebody's feeling hyper-stressed, feeling overwhelmed, unable to cope, escape, feeling very exposed or hypersensitive, and then there'll be some trigger. then that leads to self-injury. Feeling relieved and in control or calm are often the feelings that they express afterwards. The other pathway could be somebody's dissociated, feeling very numb, lost, alone, disconnected, and unreal. Their pathway then to self-injury is different because then it makes them feel alive and are able to function. So it has a different function. There can be lots of physical urges, lots of sensations like a racing heart, really heavy, repetitive thoughts about harming themselves that sort of all part of that pathway. So importantly, as parents, our questions are around how do I support my child when I find out that they've self-harmed? Finding out that your child has been hurting themselves can be really hard to accept, and it's natural to feel anxious and upset. As parents, we might also blame ourselves or feel powerless to help. But if you can try to stay calm and remember that there are things you can do to help. So firstly, focus on showing them that you are there whenever they're ready. They may initially want to talk on an app or by text. Knowing that you're ready to listen, you can cope with talking about difficulties and not judge them. These are skills that you have and they're very important. Reaching out when you're really struggling can be really hard. It's important that we can reach into our young people in distress and sensitively start conversations. Ways to start a conversation. How are things? Focus on how your child is feeling and thinking and what is happening in their lives at the moment. Let them know it's okay for them to be honest with you about what they're going through, about how they're feeling. Remember, self-harm can be a desperate way of trying to be noticed and helped. I've noticed that you seem down. Is everything okay at the moment? Being noticed is a really powerful thing when you're feeling really out of control. So let's look at some things to consider, some useful tips. Be led by the other person. Remember, you're not trying to fix things. Try to ask open questions. So questions that don't sort of want just a yes or no answer, ones that invite conversation. Things like, how did that make you feel? How bad have things got? Describe to me. Feeling heard is really important. Giving time and space and listening non-judgmentally is really valuable. Remember, self-harm is caused by underlying problems. It can be really helpful to focus on those rather than the harm itself. Try not to get too over involved in the harm and try and look at the feelings behind the harm. And if you're worried, ask directly if your child is suicidal and whether there's anything you could do to keep them safe and to keep them feeling safe. Avoid ultimatums. It's helpful to ask if any medical treatment is required. Support someone to soothe themselves, distract themselves, ask them what they need, what would be most helpful. Ask them if they would be able to tell you when they felt like harming themselves. Remember, medical severity does not indicate the level of distress that a person is experiencing. But also remember, there's no such thing as a safe overdose. All overdoses need a medical attention as soon as possible. Ask them if they would be able to tell you if they felt like harming themselves. How would they know? And here's a quote a young person said, I just wanted people to talk to, and then people would think I was just attention seeking. I was like, no, I just want somebody to talk to and somebody to help that conversation start. So now we're going to have a little look at language. We can't always anticipate what language we'll be most comfortable with, people we're most comfortable with, but we can ensure that our words are considered and sensitive. So let's look at reframing our language. Self-harm as cutters. Self-harm is how someone copes at a time of emotional crisis. It's not who they are, and it may not always be part of their lives. So it's better to say people who self-harm or who use self-harm rather than it being their label. Deliberate self-harm. The term deliberate is unnecessary. It sounds judgmental, but also conveys unhelpful and naive messages about the controllability of self-harm. So just self-harm. Superficial. It's more helpful to ask if medical help is needed. And remember, superficial, the amount of what the harm has involved does not necessarily correspond to the amount of distress. The failed suicide attempt. To fail is to be alive. This is not a failure. So language is really important. Helping your young person to find healthier ways to cope. Instead of simply asking a young person to stop harming themselves, it can be useful to suggest something that they could do instead to cope with difficult feelings. There are some things young people have said that helped. Distraction as a first step is a way of giving yourself a bit more breathing space and reducing the intensity of the urge. And this can be done as soon as you become aware of the urge that you want to start hurting yourself. There's lots of resources on Childline and on the NSPCC, and they have an activity kit, but also here are some ways of coping. Paint, draw or scribble in red ink where you would want to cut yourself. Hold an ice cube until it melts. Write down negative feelings, then rip them up and rip up the paper, screw it into a ball and chuck it hard at the wall. Punch or scream into pillows. Listen to music, create a playlist together. Exercise. Watch something funny. It's hard to be stressed and laugh at the same time. Make a positivity book filled with things that make you happy. Do this at a different time so that you can refer to it when you're feeling really, really distressed. Draw a butterfly where you'd want to hurt yourself as a reminder not to harm yourself. If you do self-harm, you can wash it off and start again. If it fades, you know the butterfly's flown away. And don't be afraid of tears. Tears are an important release. Helping your child to build their self-confidence. Remind them about all the things they do well. Help them to learn something new. Write a list of things that make you proud of them. Childline has lots of advice for young people on building their confidence and self-esteem. Help is available. This is a really important message. Self-harm is treatable, and it's possible for people to take steps towards recovery and well-being. All people who are using self-harm are in need of support. Your child might want to talk to a professional, GP or a counsellor, or to someone who isn't close to them rather than a family member or friend. This is not a rejection, although it may feel like that as a parent. It's important that your child is able to access the support that's right for them. A professional will help your child understand their own patterns of harming themselves, what gives them the urges, help them to break down the triggers, become aware of the urges, and then identify distractions and look in depth at the feelings that are behind the urges. And also help them to build self-esteem and learn skills to let go of self-harm as a coping behaviour. So here we have some numbers, lots of resources. Parents Guide, for example, on Young Minds website. There's Childline, Samaritans. There's also the Mix, which has lots of information for young people. So all these organisations have websites too, as well as phone lines for you to call, and they support parents as well. And to finish, we're just going to show a short video with some parents and some young people talking. It's called A Parent's Journey No Harmed.
It was shock, it was devastation. It was one of total disbelief. I knew about self-harm, but didn't ever expect it to happen to my little one. And I just put my arm around her and I said, it might help if you talk to me and we try and find, some way of helping you get through this.
My mum felt it was her fault. She was blaming herself for it, so it kind of made me feel bad because I know it's not her. But then to this day, she still thinks it was partly her fault. I don't want to put everything on them. I don't want to be watched constantly. I don't want people to see me as that person.
Trust yourself. Although at the time you think you haven't a clue what's going on, you probably have. Just remember that actually it isn't actually all about you, and you are okay as a parent still. And just keep talking. That is really fundamental.
My mum and my dad came up into my room, and you know what, they did something that was brilliant for me. They had accepted it. They didn't shout at me. They didn't tell me off. And that's exactly what I needed. I just needed that support, and they gave it to me, and I'll be ever grateful.
I think it's really important to have the trust, because if they don't trust you, then they're not going to be open with you. Everything's going to be secret. And then when you know the problems, you get the professional help. It's important to get the professional help.
It was definitely like a weight off my shoulders, because I've always known that these people care about me. I feel very lucky to have a lot of people around me, like all my friends, my boyfriend, my parents, and other people in my family. That's a very positive thing that has come out of this, being able to communicate a lot more with them.
She's done brilliantly, but it had to be when she was ready, on her terms and not mine. And that as a parent is hideously hard.
It took some time, but yeah, I have my moments, I have my days. Before I didn't have aspirations, but now I do, and I see a future.
So that's just a short video of some parents speaking. So it's important as well, the message is that it's hard to support your child through difficulties. The organisations mentioned offer support to you as a parent also. So take care of yourselves, listen to your needs, and look after yourselves. Thank you.